Confidence doesn't vanish in a loud moment. It slips away quietly, a little at a time. In the moments you said yes when everything in you whispered no. In the silences where you should have spoken, not for dominance, but for dignity. In the nights you lay awake not because something was wrong, but because you had slowly stopped being right with yourself. Most men don't notice when it happens. They notice when it's already gone, when they're no longer leading, when they're just following a version of themselves they don't respect. You didn't collapse. You tolerated. You didn't give up. You adjusted. You told yourself it was love. That compromise was noble. That peace was worth the silence. But deep down, part of you started disappearing, one small retreat at a time, not because you lacked strength, but because you didn't think you had the right to hold the line. You traded your backbone for comfort, your presence for peace, your clarity for connection. And now, when you look in the mirror, you don't see weakness. You see absence, a man who's still standing, but no longer certain. Let me ask you something. How much of your life have you lived through avoidance? How many choices have you made not from conviction, but from fear of conflict, fear of loss, or fear of being misunderstood? You convinced yourself that keeping quiet was maturity, that giving space was love, that letting go of your needs was strength. But tell me, what did that silence really buy you? Was it peace, or was it just the slow permission to fade? Zeno, the father of Stoicism, was shipwrecked. Lost everything. Name, direction, stability, stripped bare. And in that ruin, he found philosophy. Not because he was rescued, but because he stopped pretending. His confidence wasn't rebuilt by noise or ambition. It was rebuilt in stillness, in presence, in alignment with something deeper than circumstance. And that's the truth we forget. Real confidence doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from walking quietly, when there's nothing left to prove. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." That fear you carry, that doubt, that sense of lost self-worth, you didn't lose your confidence. You rehearsed your own disappearance. Every time you didn't speak, every time you didn't act, every time you swallowed truth to preserve something that wasn't preserving you. You trained yourself to vanish. Now, it's time to unlearn that vanishing. To come back, not with force, but with structure, with presence, with stillness. This isn't about motivation. This isn't about feeling better or being louder. This is about looking at what your silence has cost you. It's about returning to yourself, not with rage, but with a calm decision. Step by step, word by word, boundary by boundary. Dignity is not recovered in noise. It's remembered in stillness, and that's where we begin. There's a moment most men never recognize until it's too late. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's a silent transaction. When you stop moving on instinct and start waiting for confirmation. When you begin to second-guess your steps. When your action becomes a negotiation with fear. And from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You're still showing up, still doing what's asked, still carrying the weight. But inside, something has shifted. You're no longer leading. You're hesitating. And every hesitation is a message your nervous system hears clearly. I don't trust myself. That's the moment you begin to lose your masculine command. Not because someone took it, but because you stopped standing on your own clarity. You started needing permission. You started asking, is this the right move? Instead of declaring, this is the step I'm taking. And the cost? It's not just external respect. It's the internal fracture. The moment you no longer believe your own instincts. The moment your actions become reactive instead of sovereign. Modern science will tell you this pattern wires the brain. That doubt practiced becomes passivity conditioned. And it's true. But this isn't about science. This is about something deeper. Masculine confidence isn't about knowing everything. It's not about bravado. It's not even about being right. It's about standing on the ground of your own presence, even if it shakes, even if no one claps, even if it leads to silence. Because when a man moves from clarity, not from consensus, he stops being available for manipulation. Think of the man who spent his life rehearsing, always preparing, always waiting for the perfect timing. He believed preparation was strength, but life didn't wait. Life moved, and when it came, he wasn't ready. Not because he was unqualified, but because he never practiced acting without proof. He was so used to checking, confirming, overanalyzing, that he missed the only moment that mattered, the one that required movement, not reassurance. Confidence begins where hesitation ends, not because doubt disappears, but because you stop asking it for permission. You lead, not because you're certain, but because you've chosen clarity over delay, because hesitation might feel safe, but it steals your command. And once that command is gone, so is the man you used to be. It starts small. You say yes to something you don't believe in. You smile when something inside you closes. You agree, not because it feels right, but because you're afraid to be seen as difficult, distant, or cold. You tell yourself you're being kind. You call it keeping the peace. But every yes that betrays your truth chips away at your presence. And when presence fades, voice is not far behind. There's a cost to wanting to be liked, and it's always paid in self-respect. Because the more you need approval, the more you contort. You adjust your tone. You dilute your stance. You soften your edge, not out of wisdom, but out of fear. And what begins as a strategy to stay connected slowly turns into a habit of self-erasure. You no longer show up as a man with something to say. You show up as a man hoping not to offend. Zeno didn't live that way. He wasn't seeking applause. He wasn't trying to be accepted. He wasn't molding himself to fit. He was aligning with truth, quietly, firmly. And the truth never requires you to shrink. It never asks you to betray yourself to belong. But the world does. People do. Even love does. And when you confuse being liked with being loved, you begin to trade your spine for smiles. The science of it will say this mirrors addiction, that the need for social approval activates the same centers of the brain as withdrawal. And it makes sense, because once you start seeking permission to exist, not having it feels like abandonment. You begin to perform. You begin to guess what others want. You begin to disappear into roles, until one day you realize you've been present in every room but absent in every moment. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you said yes and felt small afterward? When was the last time your silence wasn't strength, but surrender? When was the last time you felt the weight of self-betrayal in your chest, not because someone demanded it, but because you offered it to avoid rejection? Trying to be liked is not compassion. It's not grace. It's fear-wearing manners. And over time, it breaks the very thing it tries to protect: your connection, your selfhood, your voice. A man doesn't regain his power by raising it. He regains it by refusing to spend it on people who only see his value when it's convenient for them. Presence begins when performance ends, and voice returns when silence is no longer a shield, but a stand. She didn't leave because you failed. She didn't pull away because you were broken. She disconnected because something in you stopped holding. Something in you stopped being grounded. What made her feel safe wasn't your perfection. It was your presence, your solidity, your ability to make a decision and stay with it, to carry uncertainty without collapsing into it, to stand even when the storm came through the door. And when that began to fade, so did her trust. It's not about being alpha. It's not about dominance. It's about calm decisiveness, a steady center, a man who doesn't need to explain himself to know who he is. When that disappears, everything else starts to follow. The warmth, the respect, the trust she never had to verbalize. Women don't leave when you show emotion. They leave when you can't hold your own frame through it, when you need them to regulate what you were meant to anchor. Indecision is not neutral. It sends a message. Every time you delayed, avoided, deflected, it wasn't just a choice. It was a statement. I'm not sure of myself. And eventually she heard it, not in words, in your pauses, in the way you stopped asserting your standards, in the way your tone changed. Not firm, not violent, just unsure. And over time, the home she built inside your presence began to shake. Epictetus once said, "What you allow, you teach. Every moment you let slide. Every disrespect you absorbed in silence. Every time you softened your edge to keep things calm." It taught her something, not about her, about you. That your certainty was negotiable, that your ground was not rooted, that what once felt like shelter now felt like driftwood. There was a man who paused too long, not just in conversation, but in life. He thought he was being thoughtful, careful, patient, but that pause, it became her signal, her alarm, her slow goodbye. She didn't know how to say it. Maybe she didn't say it at all, but she felt it, and so did he. The slow erosion, the unspoken distance, the moment his uncertainty became her burden. This isn't about blame. It's not about being harder. It's about remembering that your presence is not something you offer. It's something you embody. And when you stop trusting yourself, when you collapse inward, those around you feel it. especially the ones who look to you for steadiness. Confidence isn't loud. It's not reactive. It's not perfect. It's the quiet decision to remain whole, even when nothing around you is. And when you do that, she doesn't have to carry what was never hers to hold. Most men wait for clarity before they move. They want confirmation before commitment. They think confidence is something that comes after understanding. But in truth, confidence is what you build by walking into the unknown, without the guarantee, without the outcome, without needing to know how it ends. The more you demand certainty, the more you trade your freedom for a leash. And it doesn't matter how strong you are. When you tether your decisions to what's guaranteed, you start living like a man in chains. Seeking certainty is seductive. It feels smart. It feels responsible. But it's a trap. Because life doesn't promise clarity. It gives you moments. Moments that ask you to act. Not later. Not after you feel ready. But now. And the more you analyze, the more you delay, the more you build walls around your own agency. You become a prisoner, not of the world, but of your own reluctance. You think you're being cautious, but what you're really doing is hiding. Zeno built an entire philosophy on paradox. He taught that strength doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender to the uncontrollable, from walking forward without assurance, from trusting not in outcomes, but in alignment. That's the Stoic path. Not to master everything, but to move anyway, with dignity, with structure, with the quiet power of a man who no longer waits for the world to tell him what he already knows inside. Science will tell you that overthinking suppresses the very part of your brain responsible for action, that the longer you stay in analysis, the harder it becomes to decide. But even deeper than the science is the soul. The man who postpones becomes the man who withers, not all at once, slowly, over time. He loses momentum, loses fire, loses himself, because he traded motion for meditation and never returned. There's a decision you've been postponing, maybe 6 months, maybe 6 years. You know which one. You've made excuses, called it timing, called it strategy. But underneath it all, you're afraid, not of the consequences, but of what it might say about you if you choose, and it doesn't work. That fear, it's not weakness, it's evidence that something inside you still cares, still remembers what command used to feel like. You don't need certainty to act. You need courage, not the loud kind, not the kind that needs applause, but the quiet kind, the kind that moves in silence, that decides, not because everything is known, but because something deeper is. That's the man who returns, not because the world gave him a sign, but because he stopped needing one. Readiness is the illusion that keeps men idle. It dresses itself in wisdom. It sounds responsible. It convinces you that waiting is maturity. But underneath the delay is something far less noble. Fear. The kind of fear that doesn't roar but whispers. The kind that tells you, just a little more time. Just a little more planning. But that time never arrives. Because the man who waits to feel ready is the man who's forgotten that confidence isn't born in safety. It's born in exposure. You weren't meant to wait for readiness. You were meant to create it, not through perfect timing, but through presence, through movement, through repetition. You don't become confident by preparing. You become confident by showing up, again and again and again, until discomfort becomes your baseline, until uncertainty no longer rattles you, until silence no longer feels like a threat. Most men confuse hesitation with preparation. They think staying still is being smart. They believe if they just gather more information, they'll finally feel certain. But feeling ready is rare, almost mythical, and by the time it arrives, life has already moved on. The woman is gone. The opportunity is gone. The moment you needed has passed, and what you're left with is not safety, but regret. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He wrote that it's absurd to delay what is already in your control. He knew the battle isn't out there. It's in the man who keeps postponing his own return. The man who thinks tomorrow is his ally, but tomorrow doesn't grant strength. Only the moment you act does. Only the day you stop rehearsing your worth and start embodying it. You don't expand by thinking. You expand by stepping, by confronting what you avoid, by initiating small discomforts that train your system to carry more, stretching your edge, one conversation, one decision, one truth at a time, not to prove anything to the world, but to remind yourself that you are not ruled by delay, that your backbone didn't die with your doubts, that your presence is not conditional on readiness, but on resolve. Waiting to feel ready is one of the most convincing lies a man can tell himself. It's tidy, it's quiet, It doesn't look like fear, but it is. And the only way out is through action, not loud, heroic leaps. Just one quiet move, one small push against the threshold. That's where confidence is forged, not in knowing, in going. Not when it's safe, but when it matters. There's a kind of failure that doesn't look like quitting. It wears ambition. It speaks in terms of goals, vision, standards. But beneath it, there's paralysis. The man who says he's waiting for the right conditions. The man who's always planning, refining, adjusting. What he's really doing is hiding. Because perfection isn't pursuit. It's protection. It's the shield we build when we're afraid of what might happen if we show up flawed. You aimed high. You said you'd only start when it was time, when the moment was ideal, when the energy was right. But deep down, you knew it was never about timing. It was about control. If everything had to be perfect, you could keep postponing without guilt. You could disguise your fear as discipline. You could stay still and call it strategy, and no one would question it. Because perfection sounds noble, it sounds strong. But in the end, it's just fear, with better language. You don't lack belief. You fear collapse. You fear showing your real self and hearing silence in return. You fear failure, not because it would break you, but because it would confirm the story you've been trying not to believe, that maybe you're not enough. So instead, you build castles in your mind. You build moments that don't exist, scenarios where everything lines up, where the world makes room for your readiness. But life doesn't bend that way. Nature doesn't wait. It moves, imperfect, direct, unfiltered. The Stoics knew this. They didn't sit around waiting to be invincible. They acted, not because they felt confident, but because action was the only path to confidence. They didn't need guarantees. They moved with purpose even in failure, especially in failure, because to fail in truth is stronger than to remain in perfection's illusion. Let yourself be seen trying. That's where it starts. Not in glory, in humility. Initiate something small, something imperfect, something no one will clap for. Feel the tension, the awkwardness, the exposure, and watch what happens, not around you but within you. Because the moment you act without hiding behind the shield of perfection, you reclaim something ancient, the right to be in motion, the right to be flawed and still forward. Perfection isn't strength, it's a cage. And every day you wait for the ideal, you forget how to live in the real. Confidence isn't found in the flawless plan. It's found in the broken step that doesn't stop you. That's how men are built, through fire, not fantasy, through presence, not polish, through effort that doesn't ask to be admired, only remembered. There comes a point in a man's life where he crosses an invisible line, not with anger, not with despair, but with need. The need to be seen, to be validated, to be told, you were right. And slowly, without realizing it, he trades his posture for explanation. He starts repeating himself, justifying, defending, hoping that if he can just say it the right way, someone will finally understand what he meant, what he felt, what he gave. But that's not strength. That's surrender disguised as communication. Self-respect isn't built in conversation. It's built in alignment, in silence, in doing what honors your code, even when no one claps for it, even when they misunderstand, even when they rewrite the story and cast you as the villain. The man who needs to be understood is a man still seeking permission, but the man who knows his truth doesn't explain it. He lives it, quietly, unshakably, without needing the echo of agreement to validate the sound of his step. Seneca once said, "He who seeks applause from others has not yet set his own standards." When you need to be heard more than you need to be whole, you've already given your power away. You've placed your dignity in someone else's hands, and no matter how gently they hold it, it's no longer yours. The moment your worth depends on their ability to see it, you've lost yourself, and no amount of explaining can bring you back. A man once wrote his values in silence, not on paper, not in public, but in stone, where no one could edit them. He carried them not for display, but for direction. He didn't announce them, he lived them, and because of that, he walked away from people who once meant everything to him, not in bitterness, not in pride, but in clarity. Because some paths require solitude, not as punishment, but as proof that your loyalty is no longer for sale. When your actions speak, your words no longer need to. When your principles guide you, you stop debating your worth. The need to be understood fades, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defines you. You realize the one who misunderstood you the most was you. Every time you asked them to see you, you forgot to stand where you could be seen, inside your own boundaries. You don't get your self-respect back by demanding recognition. You get it back by remembering what silence sounds like when it's made of truth. And when you walk with that kind of silence, you don't need applause, you don't need permission, you just walk, and that's enough. Zeno didn't find confidence by rebuilding what he lost. He found it by becoming someone else entirely. Not louder, not tougher, just clearer. After his collapse, he didn't return to who he was. He rose into who he had avoided being. Philosophy didn't rescue him, it revealed him, and not through words, but through the discipline of principle. He became unshakable, not because life got easier, but because he stopped needing it to. Marcus Aurelius never wrote for the world. He wrote to remind himself who he was trying to remain. That's what these words are. Not motivation, not inspiration. A reminder of the man buried beneath the noise, of the spine beneath the silence, of the dignity you haven't lost, just forgotten. You don't need to recover your confidence. You need to stop offering it up in tiny, polite exchanges that cost you more than anyone knows. There are no apologies left to give. Not to her, not to them, not even to yourself. What needed to be seen has been seen. What needed to break has broken. What needed to leave is already gone. Now the only thing left is this, the quiet decision to stop disappearing, to stop waiting, to stop asking the world to mirror back a strength you've always carried. Imagine this. A man walks into the fog, not to escape, but because he finally trusts what he built inside. He doesn't shout. He doesn't run. He doesn't turn around. He walks with the stillness of someone who has finally remembered his shape, who no longer asks for the path to be clear, who walks because standing still is no longer an option. You didn't lose your confidence. You gave it away in small, silent moments. One boundary, one delay, one compromised truth at a time. But now, without noise, without rage, without ceremony, you begin again, not as who you were, but as who you refused to become until now. A man who remembers, a man who leads, a man who doesn't need to be seen to be sure.